starting with rook e7. Knight c5 is the move played by black. Rook e7 check. King f8. Rook c7, and suddenly white is threatening mate. So black goes king e8, and white takes the moment to advance his pawn and make it dangerous, a5. Knight a6, and now we see white's motif in its full bloom. Rook e7 check. Black must go king f8. He does not want to walk into the discovery, so he goes king to f8. And now, after rook a7, white is exploiting two threats. One is the mate on a8, and the other is the hanging knight on a6. Knight to b8, rook a8, rook b5, a6, and black is defenseless against the move a7. Just what is a skewer? Well, it is a tactical motif that means giving an attack or a check through a piece. And in this case, the check to the black king will go through him to the black bishop on g7. And so, if white simply plays bishop c3 check, white wins the bishop on g7. This is yet another very familiar tactical motif. The remarkable nature of this position is that although white seems to be losing, there are two motifs employing pins and skewers which are just sufficient to save the day. It is noteworthy that black's pieces are all placed on light squares, the color of white's bishop. The move is queen takes d7 check. Queen takes d7, e6 check. King takes e6 is the main move, and the alternative is queen takes e6. Let us explore queen takes e6 further now. White plays 3 bishop c4 exclamation mark, and now white can draw the king and pawn ending. For example, we'll continue king e7 for black, bishop takes e6, king takes e6, king b4, king f5, king a5, king takes g5, king takes a6, king f4, king b7, g5, a4, g4, a5, g3, a6, g2, a7, g1 equals queen, and white draws. Returning. Now, if black plays king takes e6, white simply plays bishop h3, and the draw is obvious. Another very common theme in chess is the exploitation of overloaded or overworked pieces. This can occur in many forms. Sometimes it can result in the gain of material, and other times it can result in a mate. In the first example, we'll see how the white knight on f3 is overworked or overloaded, and black, to move, can immediately exploit this, winning serious material by trying to decoy this knight and at the same time attack the white queen. Of course, the move for black in this position is knight takes d4, and white can resign. The notion of an overworked or overloaded piece is that it is playing too many roles. In the diagram position, the white king has two roles. One is to guard h2, and the other one is to guard f1, his rook on f1. The white queen also has two roles: to guard the bishop on h4, which is attacked by the knight on g6, as well as to guard the rook on f1. So, as part of our normal method of analyzing any position, we must investigate all the possible captures. Note also that black is a pawn up and wants to find a way to simplify to a winning ending. Since there are captures with and without checks, which we call forcing moves, he should investigate such forcing sequences as deeply as possible until the position becomes quiescent or quiet. That is, there are no checks, captures, and tactics in general. So, the first move that black has that is a capture with a check is bishop takes h2 check. And white must play rook takes h2. And now note that the white king is defending both the rook on h2 and the rook on f1. So black plays rook takes f1 check. And now white can capture with either his king or his queen. If he captures with the king, then the very fact that the white king was overloaded leaves his rook on h2 hanging to queen takes h2. At this point, white is completely lost because both his bishops are hanging and black is threatening rook to f8 check. If, on the other hand, white captures with his queen, queen takes f1, now black simply plays knight takes h4, re-establishing material equality, but also being 2 pawns ahead and threatening 3 very strong moves: queen g3 check, rook f8, and knight f3 check. And white cannot play rook takes h4 because black has queen g3 check, winning the rook. We all know about discovered checks, but how strong can a discovered check be? In the game Kopech Osipov Pan American Intercollegiate Louisville, Kentucky, 1974, the diagram position was reached. And it is the moment of truth for white. Moves like knight takes g6, question mark, and bishop takes g6, check, come into consideration, but prove inadequate. After knight takes g6, rook takes d2, knight takes f8, double discovered check, king g8, etc., black will be winning. On b takes g6, check, knight takes g6, queen takes d5, after queen takes h4, black is winning. So, the question becomes, what can white play in this position? I found queen takes d5, double exclam. This forces the black knight away from its defense of g6, and despite only a rook for a queen, white has such powerful threats, including a rook with discovered double check and the pin on the knight on d5, there was little doubt in my mind that white has more than enough adequate compensation. The game continued. Knight takes d5, knight takes g6, bishop b7. So white now gets to effect the discovered double check, which is the focal point of this example. Knight takes f8 check. Black plays king g8 to get out of the checks. White has knight e6, hitting the queen and the bishop on g7. Black plays queen f6. White plays knight takes g7. Now black has two recaptures of the knight on g7. One is with the king, and the other is with the queen. On queen takes g7, bishop e4 is a strong pin, as knight takes e3 can now be met with rook d8 check, which would win the black queen after king f7, rook d7 check. Black captures with the king. We have the game continuation, which went bishop to e4, queen to f7 is one choice for black, and the other is knight takes e3. When white continues, rook d7 check, and rook takes b7. The game continuation was queen f7, and white played bishop takes d5, and black played bishop takes d5, and now white started a doubling maneuver with 31 rook c3. The exposed position of the black king assures that white's doubling maneuver will be decisive once the rooks are able to penetrate black's 6th, 7th, and 8th ranks. Queen to b7. Rook d to c1. Queen a6. Rook c7 check. King g6. Rook d7, hitting the hanging bishop. Queen d3, walking into a self-pin. Rook d6 check. King f5. Rook takes h6. a5. Rook c8. And now we're in mutual time trouble when black played queen b1 check. White played king h2. Black played queen takes a2. White played rook takes b6. Queen e2, threatening a perpetual. Rook h8. Queen f1, threatening mate. f3. e4. In mutual time trouble, white misses rook h5 mate and plays g4 check, king e5, rook h5 mate. Now we will turn our attention to the tactical motif known as the X-ray attack and combine it with the back rank mates which we covered earlier. The diagram position occurred in Kopek-Condi, Edinburgh Congress, 1980. Note that white has double rooks on the c-file attacking an isolated pawn on c5, but the pawn is adequately defended. Also note that black's back rank is rather loose. The only defender of the back rank is the bishop on e7, and note that black's rooks are disconnected, therefore hanging. Yet, it would seem that there's no way for white to directly win the pawn on c5. It's adequately defended. However, white finds b4, exclamation mark. This star move combines the motifs of a back rank mate with an X-ray attack on the bishop on e7. If black does not take now with c takes b4, white will play b takes c5. And white will be rushing to promotion. His threat would be to play c6, c7, and c8 equals a queen, regardless of what black does. So we must naturally investigate the game continuation, which was c takes b4. And now, can you find white's reply? It's not rook to c8 check, which black could answer with bishop f8, but rather rook takes b4. This is a very unusual move. The idea is that now suddenly the white bishop on a3 has an influence on f8. Here, if black plays rook takes b4, white has rook c8 check, black plays bishop f8, and white has bishop takes b4 with a clear win. Returning to the position after rook takes b4, it is suddenly very clear that black is lost. If he plays bishop takes b4, white has rook c8 check with an X-ray double attack on the f8 square, so black cannot stave off mate. So in the game continuation, at this point, black tried g6, and white played rook c8 check, king g7, rook takes b5, discovering an attack on the bishop on e7, which is hanging. Bishop takes a3, rook takes h5, and white wins the exchange and the game. Sometimes even world championship candidates and world champions can overlook pretty forks. The following position occurred in the 1937 World Championship return match between Alekhine and Oiva. In this World Championship match game, Oiva played queen to e5 ? For black. And in time trouble, the great Alekhine overlooked the beautiful fork 26, queen to h8 check, which would win a pawn and win the game. Knight takes f7 check, king moves, and knight takes e5. However, the world champion Tigran Petrosian did not miss the opportunity for a royal fork in the 10th game of his 1966 match with Boris Spassky. He played bishop takes f7 check, and then on rook takes f7, Petrosian found queen h8 check ! And Spassky had to resign as he loses a piece. We conclude this section on material gain combinations involving forks with a beautiful game continuation from Boris Spassky versus Holmov, USSR, 1971. White's domination of space in the center and the major diagonals suggests that there may be a spectacular combination in the offing. Spassky found 1. Queen takes h6. Black replied g takes h6, and Spassky continued knight f6 check, king h8, and knight takes d7, discovered check. Now black has two replies. One is king g8, and the other is king h7. On king h7, white has knight takes f8 check, king g8, knight d7, and white wins quickly, with the threat of rook e8 check. If, for example, black now moves his queen anywhere, such as queen c7, white plays rook e8 check, black must play king h7, and white has mate in 2 with bishop e4. So white now continued rook to e8. And it is clear that white wants more than just material. Black played knight c6, hoping to return his queen. Instead, Spassky ignored the queen and played d takes c6. Homov played queen a7, and after c7, exclamation mark, black resigned, as there is no way out of the windmill of checks on the long diagonal, as white also threatens to promote his pawn. If black plays queen takes c7 here, white has knight f6 check, black moves his king onto the long diagonal, and white wins with knight d5 check. If black plays rook takes e8, white has knight f6 check, black moves his king onto the long diagonal, king g7 or king h8, and white plays knight takes e8 check and queens his pawn on the next move. The following example is noteworthy not only because of its fame, but because of the numerous tactical motifs we have discussed that it highlights, including decoy, overloading, hanging pieces, discovered attacks, pins, and Philidor's mate. It is an excerpt hallmark position from what became known as the game of the century. White has just played 11 bishop to g5. Fischer delivers a surprise thunderbolt, which is based on themes exploiting the fact that the white king is still in the center and white's overall position is somewhat loose and slightly underdeveloped. His king bishop, for example, is still at home. Fischer played 11 knight to a4, double exclamation mark. The move classifies as a decoy, and what a decoy it is. The main idea is to leave white's e-pawn hanging and to expose the white king on the a5, e1 diagonal. Now we will consider two alternatives for white. One is queen a3 as played, and the other is if white accepts the offer with knight takes a4. Black plays knight takes e4, and now we will consider three moves for white. One is bishop takes e7. Two is queen takes e7, and the third is queen to c1. Okay. On bishop takes e7, black can play knight takes c5, bishop takes d8, knight takes a4, bishop g5, bishop takes f3, and knight takes b2. And black would then have a clear advantage due to white's shattered pawns, his exposed king position, and the attack on his rook. Now we return to a second alternative for white, namely queen takes e7. Black now could try queen a5 check. White plays b4, black plays queen takes a4, white plays queen takes e4, black plays rook f e8, White plays bishop e7. Black plays bishop takes f3. G takes f3, and with bishop f8, Black recovers his piece with a winning game. And lastly, we'll consider the third alternative here for White, which is the passive queen to c1. Then Black can simply play queen a5 check, knight c3, bishop takes f3, and Black will recover the piece on g5 with knight takes g5. Let us now go on with the game continuation played by Byrne, queen to a3. Here the game continues with Black to play knight takes c3, b takes c3, knight takes e4, double exclamation mark. Having found the idea of knight a4, it is not hard for Fischer to find this combinational motif based on the exposed position of the white king on the e-file. White plays bishop takes e7, and Fischer responds with queen b6, another strong idea, better than depending only on the queen on e8. In this way, a black rook will reside on e8. Bishop to c4, when Fischer responded with knight takes c3, a desperado and decoy type combination. The decoy being based on the idea of pinning the bishop on e7 and drawing the white queen off of its defense of that bishop. White played bishop c5, an in-between move or intermezzo against the black queen. Black played rook f e8 check, and white continues with king f1. Now Fischer finds an unbelievable move, that is, bishop to e6, double exclamation mark. It is Fischer's move in this position which raises the game to an immortal level. Now we will consider two alternatives for white. The first is bishop takes b6 as played, and the latter is bishop takes e6. This would lead to an original form of Philidor's mate, which we discussed earlier in this tape. That would go queen b5 check, king g1, knight e2 check, king f1, knight g3 double discovered check, king g1, queen f1 check, rook takes f1, knight e2 mate. I hope that you have found this video thoroughly enlightening and pleasurable. We have covered basic mating patterns and combinations at 3 levels: very simple, intermediate, and advanced levels where there are combinations of various motifs. In addition, we have covered material gain combinations. This, combined with the material on my next video, basic pawn structures and how to play them, should give you the knowledge which you need to be able to achieve chess mastery. If you are interested in my other chess services, including private instruction and chess camp, please contact me at 12 Webster Road, East Lyme, Connecticut, or call me at 203-691-1537.